Here we are at St. Clair and Keele-St, one of Toronto's busiest intersections, an important crossroads supporting people, business, community. And it's situated in an area that has more than 13,000 years of Indigenous presence. Extensive archaeological evidence of Indigenous civilizations have been identified throughout this region and supported by the rich oral histories and creation stories of Indigenous nations who have been here since time immemorial. This area served as a vital converging point for the north-south, east-west throughways. In fact, these roads that serve Toronto are built on Indigenous trails and pathways. Before the horse was introduced to North America, runners from both the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee nations ran these trails, carrying messages from village to village. Written accounts from the 18th and 19th centuries attest that native messengers could run 100 miles or more in a single day.
During your busy morning commute down Weston Road, have you ever stopped for a moment and thought why this road is so windy and curvy compared to the rest throughout the city? Weston Road, an Indigenous pathway, has always served as a vital north-south route, connecting the north shores of Lake Ontario and merging with the integral Toronto Carrying Place Trail. Historically, the St. Clair and Keele-St neighborhood has always been an area of high traffic, consisting of many trails and routes converging. These trails and routes have formed the basis for Toronto's infrastructure and development. So it makes sense why, here in the junction right next door to St. Clair and Keele-St, that the railway networks were established. This Indigenous history has directly influenced the development of the city. Another great example of Indigenous history influencing the Keele-St St. Clair neighborhood is Old Westin Road, the original Weston Road, and Davenport Road, another Indigenous trail meeting right here at this intersection.
Davenport Road, which is behind me here, is Toronto's oldest road. It's an Indigenous historic route believed to be a Wendat trail. And so this trail would have winded along the escarpment of the original shoreline of what used to be Glacial Lake Iroquois. So as you can see, you can kind of see how that might have formed right here behind me and how it would have stretched across. And so Glacial Lake Iroquois is commemorated here in the concrete, as you can see. This lake is now known as Lake Ontario. Here at the stairs of Casa Loma, as you can see behind me, you can experience the steep incline of what would have been the original embankment of Glacial Lake Iroquois. This embankment formed what would have been a pathway to travel further to the west. This important historic trail provided access to the Rouge and Don rivers in the east, and to the west provided access to the Humber and Credit rivers. Which is why it was known as Gite Onigaming, an Ojibwe word for at the old portage, because you would have traveled along this trail between these waterways carrying your canoe. Hey Shaq, you need a hand? Also intersects with another important Indigenous pathway, Ishpadana, now commonly known as Spadina Road. Ishpadana, another Anishinaabe word, means where there's a rise in the land, which you can see from this vantage point. If you were trying to gain access to the Toronto Carrying Place Trail, which we will talk about a little bit later, you likely would have taken Ishpadana straight north and then arrived here at this intersection. You would have taken the Wendat Trail, Davenport Road, west through what is now known as the St. Clair and Keele-St neighborhood. This meant that access to the Wendat Trail, Davenport Road provided the infrastructure for the fur trade to flourish between the trading posts which were scattered across these lands. These trading posts were found along essential waterways such as the Rouge River to the east, to the west, the Humber River, and behind me here, as you can see, along the Don River. This pathway would have cut through the lands of what is today known as the St. Clair Keele-St neighborhood, which would have then led you to the Toronto Carrying Place on the Humber River, the major artery supporting the fur trade. You can imagine how this was an essential pathway supporting Indigenous civilizations and then later European activity, which you can clearly see reflected today, as this is one of Toronto's busiest roads that feeds into and supports the St. Clair Keele-St neighborhood.
Although we are talking about Indigenous histories relative specifically to the St. Clair Keele neighborhood, it is important that we take a moment to stop and think about our city's name and its origin. Toronto, a name familiar to almost all Canadians, and the most densely populated urban space in our entire nation. Its roots are derived from Indigenous languages. On this 17th century French map, you can see that Lake Simcoe's original name was Lac de Toronto, which was renamed by John Graves Simcoe. Toronto's original meaning differs amongst the various Indigenous nations who have resided here for thousands of years. In the Mohawk language, Dagaranto means trees growing in the water, but in the Wendat language, it likely means poles spaced over a distance or poles that cross. All words that likely refer to the narrows where Lake Simcoe and Lake Couchiching connect, where Indigenous nations had for centuries placed saplings in the water to trap fish. In fact, the Anishinaabe word Michikon refers to the meeting point of these two lakes, meaning the Narrows. The fishing weirs can still be seen there today and are 5,000 years old. And Toronto is situated upon the beautiful shores of Lake Ontario, its name being derived from Indigenous languages meaning beautiful, handsome, or shimmering lake. It was an essential source of survival for Indigenous people in the 18th century. It was even documented that they pulled out salmon by the barrelful. Lady Simcoe wrote about this herself. And it is here, where Lake Ontario meets the Humber River, where you would have encountered the Black Oak Savannah if you were headed north. a savanna that can still be seen today in High Park. High Park, Toronto's Central Park, a place that has always been loved by those living and enjoying its unique terrain. When John and Jemima Howard built their well-known Colborne Lodge in 1863, it became the basis for modern-day High Park. They chose it due to its beautifully managed landscapes and wealth of biodiversity. But this park was part of a much larger black oak savanna that is estimated to be over 4,000 years old. A rare ecosystem found in Canada that is dependent on fire, and it was managed intelligently by Indigenous populations for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The Indigenous nations that cared for these lands practiced controlled burns to manage overgrowth, allowing the savanna to flourish, where traditional medicines and berries could grow and attract grazing animals for hunting. Vital hunting and harvesting grounds for countless Indigenous peoples. This original trail connected to the larger trailways on the eastern side of the Black Oak Savanna. This Black Oak Savanna in the 16th and 17th centuries would have stretched as far north as Lawrence Avenue, as far west as Royal York Road, and as far east as Roncesvalles Avenue, and would include what is now today the St. Clair Keele-St neighborhood.
So, if you were going to establish a settlement, you'd likely do it within the Black Oak Savanna. And you choose a location near a water source, like the Humber River, the main artery for the Toronto Carrying Place Trail. This essential trail was utilized by both First Nations and Europeans during the fur trade in the 17th century. It provided access to Lake Simcoe, the Upper Great Lakes, and the fur-rich lands to the north and west. And it's connected to Westin Road and the Wendat Trail, Davenport Road. It's no surprise then that in 1999, archaeologists discovered Diagon, a 17th century Seneca village strategically placed along the Carrying Place Trail, on a summit overlooking the main channel of the Humber River. It's important to note that these populations were highly sophisticated, taking advantage of the high and low points in the land, developing horticultural fields right here near the Humber River, where they grew corn, beans, and squash. Unfortunately, Diagon was not preserved, and today it's an exclusive residential neighborhood. And it's only 10 minutes from the St. Clair Keele-St neighborhood, which indicates that it was a highly active Indigenous space.
If you were traveling on the eastern edge of the Black Oak Savanna, you would have ended up taking trails that are here in the modern-day Roncesvalles neighborhood. So it makes sense why many of the names for the avenues, the roads, still take on the name Indian. You have Indian Mound here, Indian Trail, Indian Valley, Indian Crescent. There's so many more throughout the city. All of these Indigenous trails, like Indian Road, would have ran across the eastern edge of the Black Oak Savanna, taking you from Lake Ontario all the way up through into the Keele and St. Clair neighborhood, where those trails like Davenport Road and Weston Road all would have converged together. Lavender Creek is one of the few remaining green spaces still here in the St. Clair Keele-St neighborhood today, and would have been part of the Black Oak Savanna as well. This creek still connects with the Humber River through a series of streams running under city streets, and connects with all that rich Indigenous history that we have shared. Preserving and renaturalizing green spaces such as Lavender Creek celebrates the Indigenous histories on these lands and benefits the Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples living here today.
As the St. Clair Keele-St neighborhood continues to develop, let's recognize and respect the thousands of years of Indigenous presence that have informed the shape of this area.